Prior to his appointment and confirmation at CBP, he was in the Obama cabinet as the drug czar, or otherwise known as the director of White House Office of National Drug Control Policy from 2009 to 2014. And before that was the police chief in both Seattle and in Buffalo, among many leadership roles. During a period of increased migration worldwide and into the United States, Commissioner Kerlikowske will speak to us today about the challenges facing CBP in the past and in the future. Recently, I was proud to co-author an op-ed with Gil in the Seattle paper about what a common sense package of immigration reforms might look like if Congress were to take us up on it. So with that, without further ado, the Honorable Gil Kerlikowske.
I got it. Thank you, Stuart. It's a pleasure to be with you as the replacement speaker to come in. When I was a kid growing up in Florida in high school, my next door neighbor had a truck farm. And he said, why don't you come work for me in the summer? Kathy will appreciate this. And so I spent the summer hauling cucumbers in burlap bags back when they did that. When I went back to school at the end of the summer, I decided to refocus on my grades a bit more. Well, I was asked to speak about the challenges in leading U.S. Customs and Border Protection. I have 20 minutes to do that. If any of you are interested, though, and want to stay for a couple more days, we can continue to discuss those challenges. It was great to see Senator Klobuchar. What a leader. It's great to be with my friend Stuart. This issue across the aisle is just so important. But I was on Martha's Vineyard this summer, and Governor DeSantis sent his chartered jets that arrived in the evening. So the next morning, I'm in the barber shop. And if you know anything about these small communities like the Vineyard, all the news you need to know is in the barber shop. So I was sitting there getting my hair cut, and the barber said, did you hear what happened last night? And then he told me, and he said, and one of those guys got in a fist fight with somebody and ran off, and he could be in your backyard. And I decided not to say anything because he had the razor and he was cutting on my back of my neck. But then the fire chief is sitting there waiting for his haircut. And he said, I can't believe in this country with all our resources and all our knowledge and on, why we can't secure the border. Well, by then the barber had put down his razor. And I said, I actually know something about this. So I gave them a little 101 on not only on border security, but I gave them a little history on this border issue also. So it was pretty good. So later on in the morning, a New York Times reporter called me, and he said, you just can't get away from this, can you? And I said, well, no. And he said, what do you think about it? And I said, and I gave him, I think, my best New York Times quote, which was, I said, if Governor DeSantis was really interested in highlighting where the problem is, he would have sent them to Marco Rubio and Rick Scott's house. And sure enough, they published that quote, so I felt pretty good about it. Well, you kind of might be thinking, look, I've been out since 2017 and how I can be timely and relevant to these challenges. And especially because I think my tie is too wide now and my suit, the lapels are too big. And anyhow, the challenges, though, that I faced are the same ones that were faced by the people that came after me, the people that came before me. The challenges in CBP and the Department of Homeland Security have just been really well documented, and there's even a more recent report. Back in 2015, Senator Coburn, Dr. No, or Dr. Coburn, as he liked to be called, issued a report outlining a series of problems at DHS. He stressed there was misalignment of personnel to what he considered was DHS's core mission, particularly the duplication with other federal law enforcement agencies, and I'll discuss that a little bit later. A more recent report by the Atlantic Council in 20 discussed low morale in DHS. It's always if not, it's always the lowest out of all the federal agencies, I believe, along with a number of other additional problems. So these aren't new problems, and they have not been addressed. CBP came into existence along with DHS in 2003 because of the terrorist attack. There was a singular focus. It was all terrorism all the time. And it was the largest reorganization in the federal government since the Department of Defense. From a terrorist attempting to enter the country was a great fear through a port of entry. And we saw the 20th hijacker who was detained in Orlando by an alert customs official, inspector. He was detained overnight and returned back to his home country. There was also this great fear about terrorists coming across our southern border. And there was also the great fear or concern about a nuclear device inside a cargo container coming into one of our ports of entry. Well, what wasn't really recognized is that, of course, on the southern border, the cartels control every square inch of that side of Mexico. And they are not about to jeopardize their smuggling operations, human and drugs. They're not about to jeopardize that by helping some terrorist come across. The other part with the nuclear device is that, it almost completely, given the complexity of a nuclear device, it really kind of prohibits that fear or that threat that there's going to be a nuclear device inside a box. Well, put CBP in perspective, and we can compare it to other parts of government. 60,000 personnel throughout the country and overseas. It touches every part of the U.S. economy with the exception of banking. Every piece of cargo, fruits and vegetables, as Kathy mentioned, international mail, every traveler entering the United States encounters CBP. And at the ports of entry, it's the Office of Field Operations, and between the ports of entry, it's the Border Patrol. There's an Air and Marine Division that also helps secure the border. And the Office of Trade provides a lot of resources to detect counterfeit goods, to detect things that may be made by child or forced labor, and the collection of duties and tariffs. And at the border, CBP enforces the laws for 46 federal agencies. Travelers are screened for lawful entry, and during pandemics and outbreaks of disease, CBP makes sure they're safe to enter the country. It's just a snapshot of this really large, complex, and really evolving mission. There are 15 agencies in the President's cabinet. CBP is larger than 4 of those agencies, and it's on par with the Department of Interior. No commissioner can fully understand the different parts and responsibilities of the organization. Whether you grew up in CBP or whether you came in from the outside, it's that challenging. And the changing focus of CBP by administrations, by Congress, by the public, and by the media has really changed in the last decade. And it's changed from terrorism to what's going on our southern border and people entering the country. And the people entering the country have changed from people from Mexico who were coming in during the George Bush administration for work, to people from Central America fleeing violence or coming in to try and have a better quality of life for themselves and their families. It's also changed a great deal too, because most recently it's greatly expanded where people are coming from. So not just Mexico, not just Central America, the entire region. There was a former NSC member, Dan Restrepo, who several years ago at the Council of Foreign Relations remarked, he said, you know, the United States is the destination for the world. The actions of those people entering the country have also changed. In the past, they would run, evade, do everything they could to get away from the United States Border Patrol, or they were involved in smuggling. And back then, that smuggling issue was marijuana almost always across the border. Well, today, marijuana is legal as recreational marijuana in many states. It's certainly legal as medical marijuana. So those seizures have gone way down, and the profit for smuggling marijuana is pretty limited. When I was confirmed in 2014, I was on the border in the Rio Grande Valley within a week. And that summer, we had 68,000 unaccompanied children, UACs, as we began to use the term. That was the culmination, by the way, of 2 years of increases in children and families coming across the border. Well, the challenge that I faced was this lack of support from other parts of government. We often hear the phrase, it's repeated so much, we need a whole of government approach. Well, that didn't exist in 2014. To a great extent, it doesn't exist today. Border Patrol stations were never designed or built to hold children and families. Health and Human Services failed and continues to fail to provide the resources to safely hold them. The military had little interest in us using their facilities to house people for fear of disease and security. And the Department of Justice, who is responsible for the immigration judges necessary to process asylum seekers, as was mentioned in the first panel, they've continually failed to adequately resource that part of justice. Well, transparency and openness are another challenge in CBP and overall in DHS. You know, I was a police chief for a long time, and trust is the coin of the realm. You have to have the trust of your local community. You're the face of, oftentimes, of safety and security. So you do need that trust. Well, shortly after going to CBP, I had an absolutely horrible incident. A Border Patrol agent on duty in uniform in a marked Border Patrol vehicle on the midnight shift in the McAllen area of Texas confronted 3 people, 2 14-year-old girls and a woman from Honduras. He attempted to strangle the woman from Honduras. He assaulted the one 14-year-old girl, and he left them there. He took the other 14-year-old girl in his Border Patrol vehicle to his apartment, and he tied her to his bed. He then returned back to the McAllen office and got off duty, off shift at the end of the midnight shift. Well, Border Patrol agents came across the woman and they came across the other girl, and the woman said that she had been assaulted by a man in camouflage and fatigues. Well, if you've been down and spent any time in that part of the border, there are a lot of people wearing camouflage and fatigues. But these Border Patrol agents said, you know, something isn't right. And when they went back, they could have gotten off duty, but they didn't. They began to search everyone, and there are literally hundreds of these vehicles parked there. They began to search the vehicles. They found one with blood in the back of the vehicle. They saw who was the last agent to use it. They decided to go to his apartment and knock on the door, and when they knocked on the door with local law enforcement, the agent committed suicide. They found the 14-year-old girl tied to the bed, and they released her. So going back to that trust issue, I wrote out this pretty heartfelt statement about what we were going to do and how we were going to try and take care of this family, etc. And it went up to the mothership, affectionately known as headquarters, and it went to headquarters. And I got this call back from the communications people, and they said, you can't issue that statement. This would just cause more attention to what happened. I said, how in God's name am I causing more attention to an on-duty Border Patrol agent in uniform in a marked vehicle doing this by me issuing that statement? They said, well, you need to just issue the standard CBP statement. Customs and Border Protection takes all complaints seriously. And I said, that is an incredibly empty statement. And I called Secretary Jay Johnson. We had a great, great relationship, and I loved working for him. He gave me a huge amount of freedom. And I said, Secretary, I want to issue this. He said, you just do what you think is right. And I issued it. The problem, as you know from the media, I was a day late, and so it really didn't get much attention. But I also banned the use of Customs and Border Protection takes all complaints seriously. I said, we really need to be a lot more transparent. Well, those are the internal challenges at CBP. Low morale, a focus on terrorism to the detriment of other missions. It's a broad and complex organization, the changing nature of immigration, and a lack of understanding and support from other parts of the federal government. Well, a second set of challenges involves working in the DHS environment. As it's outlined in the reports that I mentioned, this DHS is clearly, absolutely, desperately overdue for reform. From disasters, the border, cybersecurity, terrorism, presidential protection, travel, on and on, the mission has clearly overwhelmed that organization. And this was particularly highlighted when the United States Secret Service lobbied last year to try and return to their original cabinet office, which was the United States Treasury. You also saw Homeland Security investigators and their bosses signing a letter saying, we'd like to be separated from ICE, from Immigration and Customs Enforcement. You know, the question the DHS leadership has continually asked is, what can we be doing better? Well, the far more important question that Congress should be asking DHS is, what shouldn't we be doing? What shouldn't you be doing at all? What business lines should you shed? What is absolutely redundant? You know, there are already federal agencies, the FBI, for smuggling, for human trafficking, and for terrorism. There's already the Drug Enforcement Administration involved in narcotics investigations. You know, this just drains the DHS resources. I'll tell you what is needed, though, is the focus and resources for CBP to seamlessly deal with those people entering the United States. The current system of handoffs of human beings from CBP to ICE to HHS really is broken. A multidisciplinary CBP staffed with healthcare workers, educators, social workers in facilities designed to house families would be far more effective. Well, unfortunately, sadly, this has all fallen on the Border Patrol. And one writer opined the Border Patrol was busy hiring Rambo when they should have been hiring Mother Teresa. This change would allow the Border Patrol to resume the job of border security. 2.2 million encounters, apprehensions last year by the Border Patrol has exhausted that part of the organization. And as they concentrated on this unprecedented numbers, their security mission has clearly been affected. And you can see that in the most recent report about the amount of currency being seized. It's lower than it was in the past because they're so busy with the other issues. And so seizing the currency, of course, is one of the things that helps you to thwart human smuggling. Well, I've outlined the challenges in CBP and DHS. And the final challenge, of course, everyone in this room knows, is the politics of immigration and border. I was unanimously confirmed by a Republican Senate for CBP commissioner. The most recent commissioner, Chris Magnus, he was a former police chief also, just like me, from Tucson, and so he understood the border. He was confirmed on an almost party line vote. So no real reason to have this other than it just so reflects the divide and the partisan division that exists within Congress. And of course, there's the final challenge of Congress, and that's the failure to pass meaningful immigration reform. Well, all change is difficult. And Richard Hooker said, change is not made without inconvenience, even from worse to better. So almost 2 decades after being formed, quickly and with a singular focus on terrorism, the Department of Homeland Security very much needs major structural change. And I'll close with the fact that I thought the best part of CBP, one, I saw Border Patrol agents bringing in T-shirts and others from their own, other pieces of clothing from their own children to take care of this 68,000 children that summer. I saw great acts of kindness and compassion. Unfortunately, a lot of that doesn't quite get the attention. But I also thought that the very best part of being the Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection, besides working with an outstanding workforce committed to the ideals of what America could be and should be, was to be able to do naturalization ceremonies. My wife fled the Hungarian Revolution in 1956 when she was 5 years old. So I have a real appreciation for this. And when I did a naturalization ceremony at Faneuil Hall, and I told that story, as it still does today, it brings tears to my eyes. What a wonderful country it has been for her. What a wonderful country we could be. I couldn't be more honored or more pleased to be a part of today's presentation. And thank you very much.